Hello, and thanks for joining us. On behalf of the Environmental Finance Center Network, I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar, Grant Writing 101. My name is Tess Clark. I work here at the Syracuse University Environmental Finance Center. This map shows where our registrants are tuning in from. You can see that we have people joining us from all over the country, about 400 different people registered today. Through the support of the American Water Works Association, we are able to offer certificates of attendance for this webinar. You can receive a certificate if you register yourself, log in, and attend the entire webinar. This webinar has not been submitted to licensing agencies for pre-approval of continuing education credits. You must check with your licensing agency to learn about its rules, criteria, and what you need to do in order to receive credit for your attendance. Again, these certificates are provided through AWWA. For attendees who have an AWWA customer record, your certificate will be uploaded to your AWWA account within 30 days of this webinar. For attendees who do not have an account, you will receive an email from AWWA requesting you to create a customer record by a specific date to receive your certificate. If you do not create a customer record, you will not receive a certificate. Great. So on that note, I'd like to turn our presentation over today to Chris Dodson. Chris is the Associate Director of the Syracuse Environmental Finance Center.
Thanks, Tess, for the introduction, and thank you all for attending the webinar today. The focus of the conversation today will be on grant writing or developing a good project idea. So I'm excited about the number of people who are on this webinar today. That said, I know you all have your own needs and interests, and there's a lot of varying probably interests and goals that you have. So I'm going to try to speak as generally as possible so that folks can get the kind of information they need, acknowledging that some of you probably have very specific needs and ideas for different kind of grant programs. So anyway, the title of today's program is Grant or Loan Writing 101. The right grant at the right time, and whether or not it's the right project. And we'll talk a little bit about that. So just because you have a need doesn't necessarily mean that it's the right time or the right grant to address that need. So that said, there's no such thing as free money. And you guys might recognize this graphic of, I think his name was Matthew Lesko, who kept advertising in the 80s and 90s, and even still today, I guess, about all these programs where people can find free money. Well, so there is no such thing as free money. Yes, there are grant programs out there. There are numerous grant programs out there, but most of them, if not all of them, are reimbursement programs, which means that you have to expend some money before you get reimbursed that money back. Also, there's no such thing as free money because there is an awful lot of effort that goes into managing a grant or loan on behalf of a municipality. We work a lot with local governments, small governments, utilities, and the like, and some of them become overwhelmed by just the management of a grant program, all of the paperwork and the tracking and billing and invoicing and scheduling of things. It's not to say you can't do it, and I know there's probably a lot of people on the phone who have a lot of experience managing grants, but just to acknowledge that it does take time. And so my first question here is, what's more painful, developing local revenue sources or administering a grant, right? So have you considered what your project costs are and whether or not you can bear some of the burden of all or some of those costs through local funds? And so, additional revenue sources or just beginning to, plan for projects out of your general fund. Or if you're a water utility, wastewater utility, out of the fees from those. It's certainly a painful situation to consider raising rates and things like that, but sometimes that's a needed and necessary first step. If you've done that already, or if it's not possible, certainly going after grant money too. But that does take time, and there is a management challenge to owning those grant programs, if you will. And then, a lot of states now are really looking to make sure that if you're going to apply for funds, whether a grant or loan money, that you have not only demonstrated a need, but that you've done some planning work. So particularly with water and wastewater, a number of states are starting to look at either incentivizing utilities to have gone through an asset management planning process before they can get funding from the state, or mandating that folks go through an asset management planning process if they receive money from the state. Also, depending on the type of project you're trying to get funding for, states are encouraging and or mandating, again, depending on the different state you may be in, that municipalities looking for money from the state have I'd say an active comprehensive plan, meaning a plan that's been written that was written no more than 5 years ago. So I'm going to talk a little bit about developing your project idea. So you need to, rebuild your water main on Main Street, right? That's what you need funding for. And so, how difficult is it to, think about that, put it on paper, and submit it to an application? And so, really, on the face of it, it may not seem that hard. It's clear cut. You need money for a specific capital investment. But when you start going out to look for money, you have to see, which programs fund that kind of work and at what scale, and on what timeline. And so what I generally recommend people do is see what else is out there, who's doing what. And in New York State, and I know in several others, most states, when they award money, it's announced, and you can find out who's received state money and for what. And so you can start looking. Maybe there's neighboring municipalities or municipalities that are similar to you, but maybe in other parts of the state, but they have similar problems and similar maybe size and scale. It's good to look at the comparables out there. And if you're looking at a particular funding source, look at what they're funding. Maybe they're funding certain projects because it's of the interest of the state to focus on those particular areas, and also the geography of where their funding is going. So developing your project idea, see what else is out there, who's doing what, and who's funding what, and what are those funding programs particularly focused in, and then have a chat session with people and think about, how are we going to pay for this? Which grant program are we going for? Put your ideas to paper. So yes, you want to replace the water main on Main Street, but why? And it seems like a duh answer. Well, because we need to. The pipe's falling apart. People need clean water. But be able to articulate those things in writing on paper, because you have to be able to demonstrate need. So you want to thoroughly describe your project. What's the goal of the project? To provide clean water. What are the objectives? To rebuild this pipeline. And it's important to be able to demonstrate the impact on the community, the positive impact on the community that project will have, and how it's impacting the community now without it. Being able to establish a timeline for your project, assuming, let's say, that whatever funding program you're looking for, begins January 1, what's the timeline to getting that project done? When do you go out to bid? When does construction happen? If there's a public education component, you have to build in time for that. And then also being able to estimate your costs for staff, consultants, materials, equipment, and then you want to plan for an evaluation of success. So again, it seems like it could be a duh factor, like, well, the pipe's in the ground and the water's running, so that's success. But again, if you're engaging the public, are you changing your rate structure? Are you required to do an asset management plan because you received this grant money? Those are also metrics for success as part of the project. Also including the minority and women business enterprise requirements that you may have. That's a metric for success. Are you able to meet those percentage requirements? And then thinking about, again, for the project, once you build it, and use the water main again as an example, once you build it, how long will you need it? Or how long do you want it to last? And it seems like a silly question, but you really need to start thinking, communities need to start thinking about the full life cycle costs of the assets that they're building. And that includes the future operations and maintenance. So you're not going to get grant money for operations and maintenance. You will get grant money for capital improvements. And those operations and maintenance, and again, using the pipeline as an example, maybe there's not a whole lot of change because it's just replacing something that's existing. But if you're building something new, what's the impact on the bottom line on the O&M side of things? So a couple of keys to success is looking at innovation and creativity. It's hard to get creative about putting a new water pipe or replacement pipe in the ground. But if you're digging up Main Street to replace the water main, are there other things you can do while you're in the ground? Can you replace other utilities? Can you include green infrastructure or other stormwater management opportunities? Now that you've essentially dug a trench over Main Street, you can do other ancillary aspects to the project that make it unique, make it seem more efficient if you have the whole dig once kind of mentality, and maybe additional value if you're able to better manage stormwater and improve other utilities or make other things more efficient. Or just being able to repave Main Street as an ancillary benefit to digging it up to replace the project, or excuse me, replace the pipeline. So looking for creative ways that make your project unique. Another example, is you have to put in a salt barn because it's no longer cool to have your salt exposed to the elements where it runs off and contaminates water quality. That's if you're in the north part of this country where we actually need road salt in the winter. While you're building that salt shed, which may not necessarily seem sexy as a project, you could maybe put solar on it, right? Or do other things that make that project a little more unique and maybe therefore more fundable. And in many states, the funding programs try to co-fund projects. So it might be that you're asking for money to build a salt shed, and the funding program that's giving you money for the salt shed is not so interested in the solar panels, but one of the other funding agencies in the state is, and so they co-fund the project, and that makes it easier for them to find the funding for you to get the work done. The other thing, and I can't stress this enough, is calling the program officer or whatever points of contact there are for the funding program, and telling them what you'd like to do or tell them what you need, because they'll be honest with you about how their funding programs are used, how much money is available, how competitive the programs are. A program may have $1 million of available funding and may have 50 municipalities applying for $250,000 each. That means only 4 awards are going to happen. 4 awards out of 50 is not good, but that's often the financial reality for some of these funding programs. And so you're going to want to know those kinds of things going into the proposal development process. And you're also going to want to know, get some feedback, initial feedback from the program officer on what they think of your project. And so that is one of the most important things you can do is find out who the contacts are for your funding program and give them a call. So what keeps us from applying for grants if we haven't before? The fear of rejection. People are afraid of spending a lot of time. Your time is valuable. Your capacity is limited. Applying for a grant, if you have like a less than 10% chance of potentially getting the money, that fear of rejection and the disappointment of spending time and not having it yield anything. The upside of that is that success really to me means having 1 in 3 proposals funded. That means, so for every 3 proposals you write, if you get 1 funded, to me that's success in the grant writing world. And also think about, only 1 proposal in 5 is turned down because the idea wasn't good. So your idea is valuable. So 4 out of 5 of them, the idea is worthy. It's just that they don't have the funding this round, or there's some other complication as to why that idea wasn't funded. A rejected proposal, in my opinion, is worth the free advice. If your grant proposal is denied, you are entitled to ask for feedback. And more often than not, you'll receive substantive feedback as to why your proposal was not funded. And again, oftentimes it's because, hey, your project was great, we just didn't have enough money, we couldn't reach you this year, we'll try again next year. And for some communities, this will happen year after year until you get to the point where they have the money to fund you. Which is why I posed the question earlier, is it more painful to try to raise money locally or than to write a grant? If you have to wait 3 or 4 years to see a project even get funded, and then another 2 or 3 years to have the project completed, or can you develop funding locally and move forward a little bit more quickly? So again, that feedback from a rejected proposal is valuable. And the reason that's valuable is because you're going to want to resubmit the grant, and you're going to want to take that feedback into account when you do. And so the success rate is higher for proposals turned in a second time, and the success rate on a third submission is almost 1-to-1. So you get rejected, you resubmit. You get rejected, you resubmit. So what else keeps us from getting grants? Our fear of not being good writers, right? So I know write good. I actually teach as an adjunct at a local college, and I teach communications and writing. And so many college students are afraid of their own writing skills. And to be fair, many of them are appropriately afraid of their own writing skills. But I think most people kind of intuitively are self-conscious about the strength of their ability to communicate effectively in both written and oral ways. And I think you just got to practice and put pen to paper. And so there's a few examples of things I think you should consider as you write. Keep also in mind that many grant applications these days are submitted online, electronically. I often recommend to people if they go in, they log in, they set up an account if they haven't already, go through the application. Some of them are downloadable forms that you can fill out as PDFs, which is great, and you can re-upload them and send them. Some of them are more like if you've ever taken an online survey with checkboxes and dialog boxes with character limits. So you want to go through and look at, what are the questions? How are you able to respond? Is it a checkbox? Is it short form with no more than 200 characters? Is it long form with 2,000 characters? And then in some ways transcribe that to a Word document or something else so that you can fill it out offline on your own time without having to log in each time, and then essentially cut and paste and then you can also share that with other people, develop a grant writing team, and then essentially when you're ready to submit, you can take that Word document and cut and paste it and transcribe it into the online application. So anyway, be thinking about the the platform by which you are submitting your application, because that does impact the way that you are going to write it and the way that you're going to put it all together and how you can share it with other people. Nobody should be writing a grant alone. And I say that just because sometimes it's a lot of work, and you certainly need to rely on other people for budgetary information, for staffing information, for technical information. So grant writing should be a team effort. So looking at appropriate writing style, you want to write to the funding source. Make sure that you clearly identify how that funding source, funding your program, benefits the funding source, how it meets the objectives of the funding program. The 5 W's, who, what, where, when, why, and how.